In Daniel Tiger, little Daniel is always going through new experiences and learning new things. But have you noticed that Margaret's life, his little sister, isn't all that great? Aggression. Throughout the series, the baby has to deal with her problems all by herself. We usually don't notice these issues because she's not in the spotlight, but they definitely exist. For example, many times she faces danger or stress, and the main cause of it is none other than her older brother. In the episode Arguing with Your Sister, Daniel is playing with building blocks until Margaret ends up knocking down what he had built, without even realizing it, of course. She's just a little baby and has no idea that she was going to topple her brother's tower. But this makes Daniel so furious that he snaps and decides to hit her. Margaret only didn't get hit because their mom stepped in to stop Daniel and teach him that it's wrong to hurt others. Otherwise, the baby girl would have ended up hurt in this situation. Mom Tiger did well in making him realize that he can't just go around hitting people, but she never actually comforts her daughter about what happened or explains that everything is okay, even though that was something necessary to do, since Margaret is way too young to understand why her brother got so mad to the point of wanting to attack her. Mom Tiger just makes the two of them go back to playing together, and Margaret apparently forgets the conflict, but it might only be apparently. But this is only the beginning of the suffering of this little girl. We're gonna tell you everything about Margaret Tiger's sad life. So get cozy and grab some popcorn. Another Cinewave is starting now. Sick. Another situation where Margaret was left aside is in the episode called Margaret's First Thank You Day. This time the problem she was going through wasn't caused by Daniel, but rather by a very visible health issue, since she coughed several times during the episode. Normally parents notice pretty quickly when their child is sick, but she practically had to beg for help before they realized that something was wrong. That caught the attention of some parents who watched the show with their kids, and they started to believe that Dad and Mom Tiger were really incompetent in this episode. After all, she could have actually gotten really sick if they had taken just a little longer. And what if Daniel had been sick instead of Margaret? Wouldn't those parents have noticed right away? That's something to think about. Unfairly treated. Yep, Margaret almost got hit by her own brother and was also ignored while she was sick. But do you know one of the worst things about this poor girl? Even though she's the victim, she's hated by a lot of fans of the show. That happens mainly because, in many episodes, the baby ends up doing something wrong that annoys Daniel. Just like in the one where she knocked down the tower her brother had built without meaning to. And just like Daniel gets furious, some of his fans do too. And the main reason for that is that the show is told from the little tiger's point of view. Because of that, it's much easier to feel empathy for Daniel than for his little sister, who's just a side character. But we need to remember that while he's a kid old enough to know what's right and wrong, Margaret is only a baby who has no understanding of those things at all. In reality, the little one doesn't even understand why her older brother gets so mad at her from time to time. That's why it's really not cool for the fans to throw hate at the little girl. Good thing Margaret doesn't really exist, right? She'd be super sad if she knew what people say about her. If you think she deserves better than this, drop a comment below with #Margaret. Quiet. But fortunately, there's also a part of the show's fan base that actually likes Margaret, and they have a theory about why she doesn't get as much attention from her parents. After all, that's a little unusual. Generally, parents tend to focus more on taking care of the youngest kids rather than the older ones. The thing is, Daniel Tiger is kind of a problematic child, showing clear issues with controlling his anger and other emotions. Because of that, his parents feel the need to use their free time to teach him self-control and help him learn how to deal with his own feelings. Meanwhile, baby Margaret is quiet and well-behaved. She cries when something really bad happens or when she feels threatened, but she quickly stops crying as soon as she gets distracted. Her sweet little way probably makes her parents believe she doesn't need much attention, but that's not true. Margaret runs the risk of feeling lonely and pushed aside, which could result in her having self-esteem problems as she grows up. On top of that, she could learn that she shouldn't express her problems and negative emotions since her parents are way too busy helping Daniel. If Margaret keeps repressing her suffering, sooner or later she's going to explode. Anger. Even though Daniel is almost always the center of everything, he can't stand the few times when Margaret gets more attention than him. You can see this when he's trying to tell his mom a story during lunch, but she's busy helping the baby eat. Daniel gets really upset when he realizes he's not being listened to. Then, as always, Mom Tiger teaches him a moral lesson. But once again, Margaret is never comforted at any point. She simply watched her older brother get furious because she was being fed by their mom, without really understanding the reason behind it. It's as if Daniel were indirectly telling Margaret that her mealtime doesn't matter at all. Since she's an innocent baby who's still learning about the world, this kind of thought could end up sticking in her mind and following her even into adulthood, making worse what we already said about her possibly growing up with low self-esteem. Another thing that could happen is that Margaret might develop a deep fear of making Daniel angry. But since she doesn't know exactly what upsets him, she would end up anxious, constantly thinking her brother might snap at any moment. terrible. Selfishness. In the episode Sharing with Your Sister, the little girl once again becomes the victim of a personality issue from her older brother. This time it's not anger, but Daniel's selfishness that causes the problem. He's playing with some stickers, and Margaret, wanting to have fun next to him, tries to grab one of them. We don't even need to say what happens, right? The little tiger doesn't want to share at all and holds Margaret back to stop her, which makes the baby cry. Only later does he learn to share, after a lesson from his dad, and then everything is resolved. The most important thing is that this episode proves what we said before about Margaret quickly stopping her crying and not causing problems once things get resolved. All it takes is for Daniel to play at putting stickers on the baby, and she forgets everything that happened. Once again, their parents didn't have any kind of conversation with the girl, only with Daniel. Honestly, even we do better than that because we're always here talking with you about your favorite cartoons. Speaking of which, how about clicking that subscribe button so you always get our daily videos? Innocence. But Margaret's good behavior isn't just the result of self-control, but of her innocence. Unlike Daniel, she can't really notice when she's going through an injustice. That's why the little baby doesn't hold any grudges against her older brother for all the times he fought with her or was unfair to her. Now here's a question that's tough to answer. Is that something good or something bad? On the bright side, Margaret doesn't feel quite as bad about the annoying things that happen in her life, most of them being caused by Daniel. On the other hand, she ends up being kind of a victim who doesn't even know she's a victim. Even though she feels happy most of the time, there must be some bitterness inside her when it comes to Daniel's behavior and her parents' lack of attention. Since the baby doesn't have any other examples of families in her life, she doesn't know there's something wrong in the way she's treated by her relatives. Example. Even with all of that, there are indeed a few times when Margaret gets some special attention from her parents. But those scenes usually happen in very specific situations, like when Margaret really can't do something essential, such as during mealtime, or when Mom Tiger is carrying Margaret in her arms while she's sleepy. The problem is that those second kinds of scenes don't seem to be 100% about pleasing the baby, but more about teaching Daniel a lesson, so that his parents can show him he needs to be kind, patient, and so on. So, even in the rare moments when the baby does get attention, it's actually a tactic from her parents to help with their first child's development. Luckily, that's just one more of the things Margaret doesn't really notice, which doesn't make the situation any less tragic for the poor girl. It's almost as if she were just an extension of Daniel himself, which is kind of true since the show is called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. So you could say that all of the characters in the show are basically an extension of him. Point of view. There's even a theory that talks exactly about this and explains the real reason why Margaret seems to be left out so often. According to the theory, the answer is that she's actually not being left out. In fact, her parents also give the girl as much attention as possible. How is that even possible, you ask? Well, here's the thing. We just said the show is called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and that might mean more than you think. After all, he's the one who presents every episode, so it's very possible that the story is just the way he sees the world. And we all know how kids his age usually see themselves as the center of the world, only worrying about their own problems. So in that case, Margaret does get attention, has her own lessons, and is comforted whenever Daniel treats her badly. But the main character doesn't notice because he's only able to look at his own belly button. It would be really cool if this theory were true, because that would mean the baby is actually being raised in a healthy way. But until that gets confirmed, the most likely thing is that unfortunately, she's a child who doesn't get enough attention from her parents and who will always remain in her brother's shadow. We've left a couple of amazing videos on your screen. Just pick the one that catches your eye the most. Thanks, and see you next time!